Imagine a boardroom deal so sweet, so promising, that one of the world's biggest banks wrote a check for $175 million, based largely on one number: 4.25 million users. A noble mission, a charismatic founder, a product aimed at helping students. But underneath, fake numbers, inflated data, and a global bank left holding the bag. This is the story of Frank, its founder Charlie Javice, and how a startup built on a lie nearly got away with it. The pitch in 2017, fresh from Wharton and just 24 years old, Charlie Javice launched Frank, legally TAPD Inc. Its mission? Simplify the complicated FAFSA process for students applying for financial aid. The pitch was strong: help students get federal aid faster and easier. Media loved it. So did investors. Javice landed on Forbes 30 Under 30, raised capital, and projected growth. By 2021, she claimed Frank had over 4 million users, students who'd supposedly used its platform to apply for college aid. That's when JPMorgan took notice. The acquisition JPMorgan Chase saw Frank as a strategic opportunity, an entry point to connect with Gen Z, a huge base of future banking customers. In September 2021, the bank acquired Frank for $175 million. The plan was clear: integrate Frank, market to its users, and deepen ties with young consumers. Javice stayed on as a JPMorgan executive. Her future looked golden, until it didn't. The red flags appear soon after the acquisition. JPMorgan began emailing Frank's supposed millions of users with marketing campaigns. But something was wrong. Open rates were abysmal, and thousands of emails bounced. That's when internal suspicions grew. JPMorgan launched an investigation. What they found was staggering. Frank didn't have 4.25 million users. In reality, it had fewer than 300,000. Most of the user base had been fabricated. The fabrication, one of the key witnesses, was Patrick Vovor, Frank's chief engineer. He testified that Javice asked him to synthetically create data to bulk up the user list. Vovor refused, calling it illegal. Undeterred, Javice brought in a data science professor, paying him $18,000 to generate a list of fake student profiles: names, emails, dates of birth, addresses. All fake. All presented to JPMorgan as real Frank users. JPMorgan tested the list post-acquisition. Results? Massive failure. The emails didn't just underperform, they barely reached inboxes. The fallout. Once the fraud became clear, JPMorgan took legal action. They sued Javice and Frank's chief growth officer, Olivier Amar, alleging fraud and misrepresentation. At the same time, the Department of Justice charged them both with wire fraud, bank fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. Prosecutors had evidence: internal emails, Slack messages, and investor decks showing efforts to fabricate data, mislead JPMorgan, and close the deal quickly. The defense tried to argue that this was just startup exaggeration, that JPMorgan had due diligence teams, knew the risks, and still signed the deal. But the jury didn't buy it. The verdict: in March 2025, Charlie Javice was convicted on multiple felony counts. So was Olivier Amar. The court concluded that the fraud was deliberate. The fabricated user list was central to the acquisition. JPMorgan was materially misled into overpaying. And in September 2025, Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein sentenced Javice to 85 months in federal prison, just over 7 years, and ordered her to pay $287.5 million in restitution, including damages to JPMorgan. The judge called the fraud brazen and warned that tech founders, even high-profile, well-educated ones, cannot operate above the law. Lessons from the Frank scandal. This wasn't just a startup scandal. It's a cautionary tale for founders, investors, and institutions. Here are 5 key lessons. 1. Metrics matter, and lies catch up. User numbers are the currency of startup growth. But when numbers are inflated or outright faked, it's not marketing. It's fraud. Frank claimed over 4 million users. The truth was closer to 300,000. That gap wasn't a rounding error. It was a lie. 2. Due diligence is hard but essential. Even JPMorgan, with its armies of lawyers and analysts, missed red flags. Verifying user data at scale is challenging, especially with privacy concerns and opaque systems, but skipping real verification cost them millions. 3. Pressure to scale can corrupt. Javice had a vision. Frank addressed a real need. Navigating FAFSA is hard, and the student financial aid system is broken. But the pressure to show rapid growth, meet investor expectations, and cash out can push founders toward shortcuts. And in this case, those shortcuts became crimes. 4. Accountability in tech is real. Silicon Valley has long had a culture of fake it till you make it. But this case shows the legal system will step in when deception crosses the line. Just like Theranos and FTX, Frank shows that overpromising isn't harmless when investors, employees, and customers are misled. 5. Institutions must be wiser. This isn't just a founder's failure. It's also a wake-up call for VCs, banks, and acquirers. JPMorgan CEO Jamie Dimon later called the Frank acquisition a huge mistake. But more than a bad bet, it was a case of believing the hype and failing to verify. The ironic ending. The saddest part? Frank's mission was meaningful. Students really do struggle with financial aid. The market is real. If the company had grown slowly, truthfully, and responsibly, it might have succeeded on its own terms.